The Gulf of Mexico is a vast stretch of water that's been a critical source of energy, trade, and geopolitical conflict for over a century. But recently, tensions have been rising. Some people think it's just about oil, others believe it's about power. And then there's this.
The Gulf of America, what a beautiful name.
Time from now, we are going to be changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America.
Wait, what? The Gulf of America? Even Google and Apple briefly changed their maps to display the new name before public outrage forced them to revert. But this isn't just about a name change. It's about control and power over one of the most valuable energy reserves on Earth. So what's the real reason the US wants the Gulf of Mexico? The Gulf of Mexico isn't just any body of water, it's an economic and military powerhouse. The Gulf supplies 17% of all US crude oil production, making it one of America's most critical energy sources, and it contains 48 billion barrels of untapped oil reserves, ranking it among the richest petroleum deposits on the planet. Beyond oil, the Gulf is crucial for natural gas production, providing 5% of total US energy needs. More than 50% of US oil refineries are based along the Gulf Coast, making it essential for processing crude oil into usable fuels. Additionally, the Gulf's ports, such as those in Houston, New Orleans, and Tampa, handle over $300 billion in trade each year, linking key U.S. cities to global markets. Major shipping lanes pass through the Gulf, connecting the U.S. to Latin America, which makes it a vital route for both trade and military logistics. Moreover, it's home to 4 major U.S. Navy bases, underscoring its role as a national security asset for safeguarding trade routes and preventing foreign interference. But here's the thing, the U.S. doesn't always have full control over these waters. That power was strategically built over decades. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to where it all began. For decades, the U.S. and Mexico were locked in negotiations over oil rights in the Gulf. In 1978, they signed the U.S.-Mexico Maritime Boundary Treaty. At the time, the treaty seemed fair, as each country held roughly equal portions of the Gulf's economic zone. However, experts like geologist Hollis Hedberg warned that the treaty actually granted Mexico access to more of the deepwater oil reserves, and he was right. Today, Mexico holds 49% of the Gulf, while the U.S. controls 46%. Then there's the Donut Hole dispute, a stretch of international waters sitting atop untapped oil fields worth billions. Both countries have quietly vied for these resources, but now another player has entered the game: China. Adding to the complexity, the western gap of the Gulf remains largely unregulated for years, fueling concerns that Mexico and China could exploit its resources before the U.S. could secure its share. The situation escalated when U.S. oil companies began lobbying Congress for exclusive drilling rights, citing national security concerns. They feared that Mexico's partnerships with China could shift the energy balance in Latin America, ultimately reducing U.S. influence in the region. In 2025, tensions escalated after former President Trump reignited the debate by claiming that Mexico's policies and its growing ties to China were undermining U.S. energy security. In 2013, Mexico ended Pemex's monopoly on oil drilling, opening the market to foreign companies. Now, Chinese giants Sinopec and CNOOC are signing billion-dollar deals to drill in deep water zones. And China imports 30,000 barrels of Mexican crude oil daily, heightening U.S. concerns over energy dependence. In response, some U.S. politicians have even called for the Gulf to be renamed. Google and Apple briefly updated their maps to reflect the new name, which only fueled the controversy. U.S. intelligence analysts warn that China's deepening investments in the region could lead to strategic military partnerships, turning the Gulf of Mexico into an unexpected front in the U.S.-China rivalry. Later in 2025, President Trump made a statement that sent shockwaves through diplomatic circles. He urged the U.S. to reconsider Mexico's control over its offshore oil reserves. His remarks were not merely political, they were a direct reaction to growing concerns over Mexico's oil industry, especially its partnerships with China. Mexico's national oil company, Pemex, has been pushing deeper into the Gulf with ambitious deepwater drilling projects, while Chinese investments continue to pour into Mexico's energy sector, raising alarms in Washington. Meanwhile, environmentalists warn that increased deepwater drilling could raise the risk of catastrophic oil spills, similar to the Deepwater Horizon disaster in 2010. That tragedy devastated marine ecosystems and cost over $65 billion in cleanup efforts, with its effects still being felt today. For the U.S., this isn't just about trade, it's about national security. Could Mexico, backed by Chinese support, challenge U.S. dominance over the Gulf? The proposal to rename the Gulf of America is more than a symbolic gesture. It's a statement about reclaiming control. Legally speaking, the U.S. lays claim to 46% of the Gulf, while Mexico lays claim to 49%, and the rest belongs to Cuba. But militarily and economically, the U.S. is in charge. The U.S. Navy has long regarded the Gulf as a critical defense zone because it sits at the crossroads of global shipping lanes that are crucial for both trade and military operations. In a world where nations consistently fight over control over vital resources, the Gulf is key to power. For the U.S., the stakes are high. If foreign powers like China or Russia gain influence in the Gulf, they could disrupt U.S. naval operations and threaten the flow of goods. That's why the U.S. Navy is stationed in the region, safeguarding oil routes and ensuring that trade remains secure. But the pressure is mounting. With Mexico's growing deep-water drilling operations and China's increasing influence, the Gulf's future hangs in the balance. Mexico's state-run oil company Pemex is investing heavily in deep-water drilling, which could give Mexico greater energy independence and reduce its reliance on U.S. companies. In response, the U.S. is quietly investing billions in securing offshore drilling rights, investments seen as both economically essential and a matter of national security. The Gulf holds some of the largest untapped reserves of oil and natural gas in the Western Hemisphere, and maintaining access to these resources ensures that the U.S. remains a global energy leader, independent of foreign control. But what would happen if it were to lose that control? The Gulf of Mexico is a critical economic and military asset for the United States. If control were lost, whether due to geopolitical conflict, foreign intervention, or domestic instability, the consequences could be devastating. Today, the Gulf produces roughly 17% of U.S. crude oil and 5% of natural gas, with major refining hubs in Texas and Louisiana. Losing access would cripple domestic energy supplies, forcing the U.S. to import oil at much higher costs. Offshore drilling operations by companies like ExxonMobil, Shell, and Chevron would be disrupted, triggering an oil supply crunch that could send global prices soaring. A drop in Gulf energy production would also drive up gasoline prices nationwide, impacting transportation, food, and manufacturing costs. The U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve, predominantly located near the Gulf, would suffer as well, making it harder not only to sell oil, but also to replenish stocks. Disruptions in the region could paralyze shipping routes, slowing imports and exports, and leading to higher prices for goods across the country. Yet this issue isn't just about economics, it's about national security. The U.S. military relies on the Gulf to protect power across the Western Hemisphere. Should foreign powers like China or Russia gain a foothold in the region, the balance of power could shift dramatically, leaving the U.S. scrambling to secure its interests. If a hostile nation or its proxies were to control key Gulf infrastructure, U.S. energy security would be at risk. With the Chinese government already investing in Gulf refineries and ports, a loss of influence here could grant unfriendly nations greater leverage over U.S. energy policy. Moreover, the U.S. Navy depends on Gulf-based ports and shipyards for both operations and defense manufacturing. If foreign actors were to control or significantly influence Gulf waters, they could disrupt naval movements, interfere with trade routes, or even restrict military deployments during a crisis. The establishment of foreign military bases or the deployment of warships in the region would pose an even more direct threat to U.S. territory. So where does this leave us? Right now, the U.S. and Mexico are locked in an economic and political standoff over the Gulf. While Trump's 2025 remarks made headlines, this conflict has been brewing for decades. One thing's clear, the Gulf of Mexico is more than just a name. It's a battleground for the future of energy, security, and global power. Will the U.S. tighten its grip, or will Mexico and China reshape the region's future? Let us know what you think in the comments.